The October wind whistled through the dry cornfields of Missouri as Arthur Mitchell observed the horizon from the porch of his adobe house. His eyes were worn from years of scanning the sky for rain, and his hands were as cracked as the soil he had worked with silent devotion for 50 years. At 68, his thin but sinewy body remained upright out of pure dignity, although inside something had broken long ago. The smell of freshly made coffee mingled with the morning dampness. Arthur held between his calloused fingers the invitation that had arrived 3 days ago. Thick paper, golden letters, language that seemed from another world. The Foundation for Agricultural Development of Missouri was celebrating its 10th anniversary with a charity gala in Springfield. His daughter Melissa had insisted he attend. "It's important that you go, Dad," she had told him over the phone from the city. "There will be people who can help farmers like you." Arthur did not respond. What could those suited businessmen know about what it meant to wake before the sun to speak to the earth? What did they know about the fear of a cloudless sky, or the feel of a perfect ear of corn as a reward for months of work? He looked at his worn boots by the door, the same ones he wore when his wife Dorothy was still alive, when Melissa still ran between the furrows chasing butterflies, when the harvest was enough to live with dignity, the same boots that now seemed ashamed of themselves. "A farmer among lions," he murmured, while caressing the straw hat his father had passed down to him. He left it in its place. He would not attend. But that night, as the crescent moon illuminated the sleeping fields, the memory of his promise to Dorothy on her deathbed assaulted him as it had so many times before. Never give up, Arthur. Never let them make you feel less. The memory took him back 5 years. The bank had rejected his loan application to modernize the irrigation system. The manager didn't even look him in the eyes while explaining that his small plot did not represent a viable investment. Then came the 3-year drought, the worst in decades. While large estates could afford deep wells, his crops withered under the relentless sun. That same year, he met Edward Blackwell, a tech entrepreneur from New York City who had bought adjoining lands. He came with new ideas: drones, moisture, sensors, and barely disguised contempt for traditional methods. With a condescending smile, he had offered to buy Arthur's land at an insulting price. "It's the best someone like you can get, Mr. Mitchell. Small-scale farming is doomed to disappear." Arthur had rejected the offer, swallowing the humiliation like dust in dry times. Weeks later, he discovered that Melissa, his only daughter, was working for Blackwell's company. She had studied agronomy at State University thanks to her parents' sacrifices. "This is my opportunity, Dad," she explained with bright eyes. "We're developing technology that will revolutionize American farming." What Arthur didn't expect was that a year later his daughter would announce her engagement to Blackwell. The businessman, 25 years older than Melissa, didn't even have the decency to ask for his blessing. The wedding was held in New York, in a luxury hotel where Arthur felt as out of place as a corn plant in the desert. During the reception, Blackwell barely spoke to him, introducing him to the other guests as a traditional farmer in a tone that made the word synonymous with obsolete. "You have to admire his tenacity," Blackwell had said to his partners while Arthur was a few steps away, pretending not to hear. "He still plows as his ancestors did, a true living relic." The polite laughter burned more than the August sun. That night, Arthur returned to his home without saying goodbye, with a knot in his throat and the certainty that he had lost his daughter forever. The day of the gala arrived with an unexpected letter. Melissa sent him a new suit and begged him to attend. "There will be important announcements," said the note written in her elegant handwriting. "Please, Dad, do it for me." Arthur looked at the black suit laid out on his wrought iron bed. It looked like the shadow of another man, a man he would never be. But something in his daughter's words awakened an almost extinguished spark. Perhaps it was pride, perhaps love, perhaps simple stubbornness. The Mitchells never give up, his father had taught him as they planted together under the light rain. "We're like the mesquite. We bend, but we don't break." That afternoon, after polishing his old boots until they shone like dark mirrors, Arthur dressed in the new suit. It was large in the shoulders, as if designed for a more important man. He looked at himself in the cracked mirror of his bedroom and barely recognized himself. But in his eyes remained the same silent dignity that had always defined him. The driver Melissa sent picked him up punctually. During the journey to Springfield, Arthur contemplated the fields passing quickly through the window, small plots like his next to extensive industrial monocultures. The contrast hurt him like an open wound. The hall gleamed with golden lights when Arthur entered. Waiters with silver trays circulated among men in suits and bejeweled women. Projections of green fields decorated the walls while an orchestra played softly. He immediately felt out of place, like a kernel of native corn in a silo of modified seeds. Discreetly, he positioned himself near the drink bar, rejecting the champagne they offered him for a simple glass of water. From there, he observed the flow of important people. No one looked at him. No one recognized him. He was invisible, as farmers have always been to the powerful. In the center of the hall, Edward Blackwell conversed animatedly, surrounded by investors and politicians. His voice resonated above the others, talking about millions of dollars in investments and expansion projects. "The future of American farming," he said grandiloquently, "lies in technology, not in the romanticism of the past." Arthur's eyes searched for his daughter in the crowd, but he couldn't find her. Why had she made him come to witness his own insignificance? "A farmer among lions," he murmured again, feeling the weight of those words sinking into his chest. When dinner was announced, Arthur was assigned to a peripheral table, along with other small producers and representatives of rural communities. The distance between his table and the main one, where Blackwell sat with the guests of honor, seemed to symbolize the entire gap that separated two irreconcilable worlds. After the first course, the Master of Ceremonies invited Blackwell to the podium to present the Foundation's new project. The businessman rose to applause, adjusting his tie with satisfaction. "Tonight," he began with a powerful voice, "we present the initiative that will definitively transform Missouri farming. Our agricultural conversion and efficiency program will allow unproductive plots to be integrated into a modern large-scale production system." The words stuck like thorns in Arthur's skin. Unproductive plots was the euphemism they used to refer to small properties like his. "We have identified more than 2,000 acres," Blackwell continued, "whose owners will be invited to join our model or sell at a fair price." Polite applause resonated in the hall. Arthur felt short of breath. Cold sweat ran down his back. His land, the land he had inherited from his father, that he had worked with his own hands throughout a lifetime, was now just a number in Blackwell's statistics, an obstacle to remove. Because, let's be honest, Blackwell smiled smugly. Subsistence. Farming is a romantic anachronism that has no place in modern America. More applause. Arthur clenched his fists under the table, his nails digging into his calloused palms. He wanted to stand up, to shout, to defend his dignity, but who would listen to a defeated old farmer? It was then that the doors of the hall opened. Melissa entered with a determined step, beautiful in an earth-colored dress that contrasted with the artificially luxurious environment. Her eyes scanned the room until they found her father. A warm smile lit up her face, but vanished as she looked toward the podium where her husband continued speaking. Blackwell paused upon seeing her enter. "Ah, my wife finally honors us with her presence. Melissa, darling, I was explaining our vision for the future of Missouri farming." Melissa did not respond. With firm steps, she crossed the hall. Everyone expected her to head to the main table, beside her husband. Instead, she walked directly to the table where Arthur was seated. A murmur of confusion ran through the hall. "Dad," she said in a clear voice that everyone could hear in the sudden silence. She leaned down to embrace him, with genuine affection, kissing his sun-weathered cheeks. Arthur, surprised, rose awkwardly. Melissa took a seat next to him, ignoring the bewildered expression of Blackwell, who had frozen at the podium. "Please, continue with your presentation, Edward," said Melissa, with a calmness that barely concealed her determination. "I'm sure we all want to hear about this project." The businessman tried to regain his composure, but his speech lost strength. His eyes constantly went to the table where his wife was conversing quietly with that farmer he had ignored all night. a farmer who, everyone now understood, was his father-in-law. The discomfort was palpable. The presentation ended abruptly, and Blackwell left the stage visibly upset. He headed directly to the table where Melissa and Arthur were. "What does this mean?" he asked in a low but tense voice. Melissa looked at him with a mixture of sadness and determination. "It means I won't allow you to continue despising my father or what he represents," she responded with serenity. "This man whom you call an anachronism taught me the value of the land long before you knew how to differentiate between native corn and a genetically modified one." Blackwell paled. Nearby guests pretended not to listen, but it was evident that every word reached their ears. "Let's discuss this in private," he insisted, extending a hand toward his wife. Melissa didn't move. "There's nothing to discuss in private. Your contempt has been public for years." Arthur, uncomfortable being the center of a dispute, tried to intervene. "Daughter, it's not necessary." "Yes, it is, Dad," she interrupted him gently. "For years I've been silent, hoping Edward would understand the value of what you and thousands like you represent. But tonight, I've realized he never will." Blackwell, aware of the looks they were attracting, forced a tense smile. "Melissa, you're confused. My project seeks to improve the lives of farmers like your father." "Improving their lives or taking away the only thing that gives them dignity," she replied. "Land is not just a financial asset, Edward. It's history, it's identity, it's life." The silence that followed was more eloquent than any response. Blackwell withdrew, visibly humiliated, but trying to maintain his composure in front of his guests. The gala continued, but something fundamental had changed in the atmosphere. During the rest of the night, several guests discreetly approached Arthur's table. Some, small producers like him, shook his hand with silent admiration. Others, investors and officials, suddenly seemed interested in hearing his perspective on traditional agriculture. Melissa remained by his side, explaining with passion and technical knowledge how ancestral practices could be combined with appropriate innovations without destroying the social fabric of rural America. At dawn, Arthur and Melissa walked through the dry fields of the small property. The dew slightly moistened the cracked earth as the first ray of sun gilded the horizon. She had told him her decision during the return journey. She would leave Blackwell and the company they had built together. "I've been developing my own project," she explained. "A system of microcredits and technical advice for small producers. We don't need big corporations to save American farming, Dad. We need to respect its wisdom while contributing the best of science." Arthur walked in silence, processing his daughter's words. He felt a contradictory mixture of pride and concern. "I don't want you to sacrifice your marriage for me," he finally said. Melissa stopped, looking toward the horizon where the sun was beginning to rise. "I'm not doing it for you, Dad. I'm doing it for myself, for what I believe. Edward taught me a lot about business, but you taught me about life, and I can't continue living divided between two worlds that despise each other." She bent down to take a handful of dry earth and let it run through her fingers. "This land has memory, Dad, and so do I." In the following months, the news shook the business circles of America. Melissa Mitchell, brilliant agronomist and ex-wife of the powerful Edward Blackwell, was launching her own foundation focused on preserving traditional agricultural practices and integrating them with appropriate technologies. The project, baptized Roots and Future, quickly attracted the attention of international organizations and socially conscious investors. Most surprising for many was discovering that her main advisor was an elderly Missouri farmer, Arthur Mitchell. A national magazine published a report titled "The Wisdom That Money Cannot Buy," with a photograph of Arthur in his fields showing young agronomists how to read the signs of the earth to determine the exact moment for planting. The Blackwell Foundation, meanwhile, faced growing criticism for its aggressive methods of land acquisition. Several government contracts were revoked following journalistic investigations that revealed undue pressure on small landowners. When the first rain of the season finally arrived, Arthur was in his plot, supervising the installation of a water collection system designed by his daughter, a perfect combination of ancestral wisdom and appropriate technology. The water began to flow through newly excavated channels, heading toward lands that had remained dry for years. In the distance, a black car stopped alongside the dirt road. Arthur immediately recognized the figure descending. Edward Blackwell, alone, without his usual entourage of advisors. The businessman walked slowly toward him, his Italian shoes covering themselves with mud with each step. When he arrived in front of Arthur, his face reflected a combination of wounded pride and genuine curiosity. "I suppose you must be satisfied," he said without greeting. "You've recovered your daughter and seen my fall." Arthur gently shook his head without ceasing his work. "I don't rejoice in anyone's failure, Mr. Blackwell," he responded in a calm voice. "And Melissa is not a property that can be lost or recovered. She has always charted her own path." Blackwell observed the fields that were beginning to revive with the rain. His financial empire was crumbling while this simple farmer, whom he had despised, flourished again like the land after drought. "I came to make you a proposal," he finally said. "I want to buy your participation in Melissa's project. Name your price." Arthur slowly straightened up, feeling the weight of the years on his back. He looked directly into the eyes of his ex-son-in-law for the first time. "There are things that are not for sale, Mr. Blackwell," he responded with dignity. "My knowledge, my relationship with my daughter, my connection with this land, no check can buy them." The raindrops were falling harder now, soaking both men. One protected by an expensive suit that was beginning to ruin, the other accustomed to the elements, receiving them like old friends. "Do you know what the difference is between you and me?" continued Arthur with a serene voice. "You see the land as something to be possessed. I know it's she who possesses us." Blackwell did not respond. He turned around and returned to his car, defeated not by force, but by a wisdom he could not comprehend. A year later, Arthur contemplated his plot from the porch of his house. The cornfield extended green and exuberant under the June sun. Young people from neighboring communities worked alongside agricultural technicians, implementing the model developed by Melissa, cooperatives of small producers using sustainable techniques supported by appropriate technology. The adobe house had been renovated while respecting its original structure. A small training center had been built on adjacent land where farmers from all over Missouri came to exchange knowledge. Melissa arrived in her truck, accompanied by representatives of an international organization seeking to replicate the model in other countries. Arthur received them with the same humility as always, but now his back straightened with the confidence of one who has been vindicated by time. As they walked between the furrows, explaining the system of polycultures and traditional water management, Arthur stopped next to a particularly strong corn plant. "This variety," he explained to the visitors, "has been cultivated by my family for 7 generations. It survived the Depression, the droughts, the trade agreements that favored imported corn, and those who wanted to convince us it was worthless." Melissa smiled, recognizing in her father's words a wisdom that transcended agriculture. "People are like corn plants," continued Arthur, looking toward the horizon where the Missouri hills stood out against the blue sky. "They can ignore us, belittle us, even try to uproot us. But if our roots are deep, we'll always find a way to flourish again." That night, after everyone had left, Arthur sat alone on the porch. He took from his pocket the old straw hat that had belonged to his father. He had kept it during those years of humiliation, ashamed of what it represented. Now he placed it on his head with quiet pride. The wind whispered among the cornfields like an ancient song, the same one his ancestors had heard. Arthur closed his eyes, feeling the caress of the breeze on his weathered face. He needed nothing more. The land remembered, and that was enough. How many men and women have been silenced by those who confuse price with value? If this story touched your heart, tell us in the comments, subscribe to hear other forgotten voices, and visit our playlist of moving stories to remember that we all carry invisible scars that only dignity can heal.